So it's been a while since I've made a video about testing on this channel, so I figured I'd do it now. I do think testing is still super important, and as your project gets more complex and you have more team members, it's one of those invaluable things you have to have on your code base for you guys to make progress. Otherwise, you just start slowing down because everything's too hard to maintain and update. And people just start adding bugs without them even knowing it. So I'm going to show you writing an integration test by doing test-driven development. I am going to be doing what I consider my approach to test-driven development because I think there's a lot of dogma around the proper way to do it. A lot of people hate test-driven development too. So honestly, I don't care. Write your tests. You write them before or after you write your implementation. I don't care. I just think you should do it. And I do think test-driven development can help in some scenarios. Okay, so we have an integration test, which is supposed to do a post request to a user's endpoint. Okay, and we don't have that endpoint implemented yet, so we're going to have to implement that. But before you start doing the implementation, the point of test-driven development is you write a test and get all your specs outlined first so that you really have a good understanding of like how your API should be designed. And then you can go back and implement it and your test will just turn green when everything's good. But we're going to do this the simplest way that I can do the teach. I'm going to say when someone does a post request to /users, it should throw or send back a 400 status error if email is bad. Okay, probably not the best term for it, but what we're going to do in this test is basically make a request to that endpoint. So you'll see here we're saying request, which is coming from super test. We're going to pass in our express app instance here. We're going to hit that user's endpoint. We're going to send in some data. We do have a bad email. And then eventually we're going to have to check to make sure that we get back the status code of 400. And in the body, we should at least get back some type of error message. Now, this one's debatable. It really depends on your API and how you want to define how to send back errors to the front end. I would maybe even say like this should be something like this. So it's easier to like know what fields were bad when you tried to submit this. So now that we have a test, you can actually run it and you'll see that it's timing out because we don't even have this endpoint implemented. Okay, so let's start with trying to build out this endpoint and at least get the test to pass. So the first thing we could do is we're going to bring in Zod so we can start validating the request body. So I'm going to say bring in a user schema, which requires a name and an email, just like that. And then we're going to parse the body, which if this thing were to not parse correctly, it does throw an exception. So technically we could like wrap this whole thing in a try catch like this. And then we could just say if it's a Zod error, we could send back the errors. Otherwise, we could try to insert into the database and then we could send back the newly added user and then send back a status code of 201. So I think this implementation looks pretty good. But if you look at the test, we just saved the file and it got reran. And the issue is because we are expecting a different type of format for these Zod errors. So let's see if we can find a way to basically format this. So we can go const errors is equal to json.parse. I do believe this whole thing is like a giant string. And then we're going to say, I'll just print out errors and see like what this looks like. Okay, so if you look at the output, you'll notice that we are getting back an object now, but it doesn't match that format that we kind of expected. So I do think we can run like a reduce over this array and turn it into this. So I'm going to say dot reduce, and I'm going to see what we can get with that. Okay, so here's a nice little helper function. We could probably extract that away and do some refactoring a little bit. But notice here that our test is passing. So whenever you pass in a bad email, we do get back an object that looks like this. So we could then duplicate this and do the same thing for name, or if you wanted to basically do them both here at the same time, I think you could probably do that. I do think sometimes having smaller tests that verify one thing might be better, but we could just go ahead and like extend this test a little bit. I'm going to just make sure that name does return. Too small, must have at least one character. And I'm going to change this one to should validate all fields in return a 400 status code with expected error fields. Okay, does that make sense? So again, this is my approach for test-driven development and what I found works in practice. Sometimes you have to balance writing a good test and then you go and write the implementation. Sometimes you don't have the full specs given to you. You have to think about them. And as you're thinking about them and implementing stuff, you think about other stuff that you can then test better. You can rewrite your test, change what you actually expect. And I think that's fine. The idea is that the testing and the implementation should kind of like bounce back and forth and help you write better high quality code. Okay, so this was a test for verifying the validation, but now we should probably test that the user was actually added into the database and that the user was returned back to us properly with like a new auto incremented ID. So I'm gonna go ahead and just copy, actually I'm just gonna write a new test here. Should send back a user object with incremented with auto added ID and rated at timestamp or something. Okay, so we're going to again do a post request to users, but this time we're going to check for a status code of 201, and then we want to check if it has any type of ID assigned to it, right? It needs to auto assign an ID and also a created at. So I'm going to go ahead and save this, go and load up our tests, and this one is passing as well. And again, it's always good to verify this. If I didn't return this and save, like does my test fail? And it looks like it's going to time out because we're not doing a proper response here. So the test is kind of verifying that we do return the new object that was created and added to the database. So I think that's good. Okay, I think this is pretty good. I'm going to write one more test because we want to actually verify, did this user get inserted into a database? Right now, we're just testing that, hey, this endpoint does return a user, but I don't know if it was actually persisted correctly to the database or not. We're just kind of assuming that since it returns a user with a new ID and a created at, that yeah, it might be working fine. I do think it'd be good to hit 2 endpoints in the same test. Okay, again, I do think this is valid for an integration test. Now, it is debatable where you want to put this file because it's kind of like hitting multiple endpoints at the same time. I do think at the very least having a different description, and we could just say get at users, and we're going to take this second it statement, okay? Should be able to get back the same user we just persisted into the database. Okay, so again, this test, although it does say it's a GET request to /users, I kind of want to set up the database and make sure that it does create a user first. So I'm going to say before each, I think we want to do async here. We could run this because I want it to just insert a user first. Now, since we're inserting a user, we're going to have to keep track of that user ID somehow because it is auto-incremented, right? So we're going to go and say like let created user ID, and then we are going to set this to the response body. And then down here, we're going to do a GET request instead. So I'm going to say do this, do /users with the created user ID, and I want to verify that, hey, do we get back the exact user that we added? Now, I would even change the name of this a little bit because up here, I think we also called him John Doe. So I might even say like this will be like Billy Ray or something. Billy Ray. And then this will be Billy.Ray. Just because when errors are printed out, sometimes your eyes will get confused and you keep seeing John Doe, but then you have like 30 tests that all use John Doe. Make every test as unique as possible with a different title, maybe even different data, so that when stuff goes wrong, you can quickly debug it. Yeah, so now we could try to verify is this test failing, and it is because we don't even have a get users endpoint. Okay, so let's go back and we're going to implement that. We're going to go and make a app.get. We're going to try to fetch back the user from the users table. I think I can say db query.users. Oh, I think I need to add the schema here. Hold on, let's do this. We're going to add the schema so that in Drizzle, I should be able to say .users find first, and then we can grab that user where the user ID. Okay, make sure this is here. Get an equals to with Drizzle. This thing has to be parsed, so we definitely have to parse it. And that the user's not found, we throw back a 404. Okay, I think this is a pretty good implementation. Let's go back to the test case and make sure it's passing. It is. So now we've actually verified that if we add a user with this endpoint, we can then later fetch it back, which is pretty good. Now we did add, if there's no user, just send back a 404 status code. I think we should probably write a test to verify that as well. So we're going to go back over here and say, should send 404 status code when fetching non-existing user, okay? And then we're going to go ahead and just make a random ID here. Okay, just some random numbers. And we want to make sure our 404 status code comes back, and that's working as well. Now, another thing we need to keep in mind is that we're just like parsing whatever string a user passes in. This is probably problematic, and we should probably be also doing some type of check here. So we're going to just make sure that the user ID that's coming from the params actually is a number, so we can use it like this. So we're going to do a Zod coerce, which is going to basically cast it to a number if possible. If not, it'll throw an exception when we parse it. So with that being said, again, the test, I think it'll still work, but I want to just add another test. I'm going to add one more that says should send a 404 status code when a bad user ID is passed in the URL. Okay. In fact, I might even do a 400 status code because like the user just didn't use the API correctly. So you want to let the user know that, hey, you're actually sending in bad information here. So if I just put a string here, some bad non-number, and then I save this, we should get a failing test, but we're getting a 500 status code. So we do need to fix our implementation a little bit. And then we're going to say expected number receive string here. I don't know how Zod actually returns that back, but we need to go back to our implementation. And I'm going to wrap this whole thing in a try catch like we did on the other endpoint. Okay, we're going to take this whole code out, put it there. If we get a Zod error, we can go ahead and do the same type of reduce function. So down here, I think I'm going to try to make a utility function to convert the error message to a JSON object, and then we can just send back the 400. So I'm going to go up here and say function convert Zod error to JSON. And then we want to say const errors is equal to json.parse error message. We could probably do that same reduce there. And then hopefully we can call it right here. Don't need to have that whole thing in there anymore. Let's make sure our tests are still passing. Remember, that's why we have tests. We can make changes and refactoring and make stuff faster. And as we save files, this stuff will automatically tell us if we broke stuff. So we're still good. Except for that one failing test, which we haven't implemented yet. So let's do here. This one needs to be called error, actually. And let's see what's happening now. So we're close. It's actually getting back a different type of response here. So we could probably just update the test to expect something that's more accurate. All right, there you go. That is an example of doing test-driven development with integration tests. We successfully added 2 REST API endpoints. We're doing validation on the inputs. We are verifying that the things that they return are good. And we also have a test case to verify that, hey, when we actually submit a user, does it get stored to the database and can we fetch it back later? Technically, this whole before each, it's only used here. So like we could honestly just put it inside this test. Like we don't have to have it in a before each. So I think that could help us out. Also like post response. And then this one will just be response. Okay, let's make sure the tests are still passing and we're good. Okay, and if this was on a real project, you'd probably have a GitHub action that would run through all your tests before someone would accept the pull request. And you'll have like a list of all your tests and checks in the pull request that'll all be either red or green based on if your developers broke something or not. Now, before I end, I do want to say I'm trying to make a course where I teach how to build out a REST API, and testing is one of the things I'm going to cover in that course as well. So if you did like this type of content, let me know below if you'd be interested in a course that teaches this type of stuff or building out a more professional level REST API. All right, that's about it. Have a good day and happy coding.